Hello and welcome to this week's two-part special of Fight Through Film, the podcast where we question how film acts as a form of racial activism. We will focus on both the reception and distribution of Steve McQueen's Small Axe series and Ava DuVernay's 13th, and what it means to make political content amidst both a global pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement. Due to this, the Fight Through Film team would like to use this opportunity to acknowledge our personal white privilege. Our discussion has been primarily shaped by ideas projected by Black voices. If you would like to read about these issues further, the resources that are mentioned over the course of this episode have been linked to the show notes. In this first episode, we are going to be looking at Steve McQueen's Small Axe series, which was released on the 15th of November 2020. The series had been initially streamed on BBC One, but is also available to watch free on BBC iPlayer. The title of the series has taken inspiration from Bob Marley's hit 1973 song Small Axe, drawing links between the series and its discussion of Caribbean heritage. I'm joined with special guests Alex and Sophie Marshall to discuss McQueen's series and offer their opinions on the series. So firstly, I wanted to ask, how was Small Axe advertised, and consequently, do you think this affected its reception?
Well, there's been much speculation about how well the Small Axe series was advertised and circulated. Taking Mangrove as an example, the film was not distributed in cinemas, which wasn't due to COVID, but it had originally been planned as a TV release. Mangrove was also originally on the main competition list at the Cannes Film Festival. However, as a result of coronavirus, it was cancelled, meaning Mangrove opened virtually. Thirdly, the BBC have put Mangrove on iPlayer, which sounds like it'll reach a wide audience. However, you need a TV licence, for example, to watch a series, meaning it'll automatically reach a smaller audience. Viewers from outside the UK are also unable to go on iPlayer, with a geo-block on the site, with Amazon Prime being the only other provider of the series, which again is a paid service. Consequently, despite Small Axe being given the primetime spot on BBC One, the audience that tuned in was actually quite shocking, with there only ever being a maximum of 1.2 million views for a live broadcast. This completely contrasted with the reviews of the series, obviously, with the films holding a rating of 98% on Rotten Tomatoes, for instance. Paul Gilroy, a black British writer and historian, has praised the Small Axe series and, in an exclusive article in The Guardian, said, "What's exciting about Steve's films, the Mangrove one in particular, is that they are an attempt to offer a historical transfusion that, in the present condition, can give younger viewers and mainstream viewers an alternative sense of what the history of this country might be over the last 50 years. Rivera has even claimed that before Small Axe was produced, we knew McQueen was good. But following Small Axe's release, it's undeniable that he has the range. It is clear that the Small Axe series was received incredibly well."
I've actually heard that many critics have commented on the fact that McQueen seems to only focus on black life in London. Lamre Bakari of The Guardian wrote that Small Axe is great. Now let's have some films about black life outside of London. In his article, he suggested that whilst McQueen has made a giant leap forward for black British filmmaking and that he has appreciated every second of the series, there has not once been a film or documentary on the black experience in the suburbs or somewhere like Liverpool or Manchester, with more than 70% of the film industry being based in London and the South East. The Black Lives Matter movement prompted the BBC to pledge to spend around £100 million on diverse programming. However, this scheme remains dedicated to London, and we know that following on from McQueen's Small Axe series, he is planning on examining the New Cross fire of January 1981 and the riots in Brixton in his next TV series. McQueen is planning on using testimonials from the survivors, investigators, activists and representatives of the machinery of state in order to produce this series. Whilst this is amazing and yet again sheds light on racial issues, it is once again focused on a London-based riot. So McQueen actually responded to this criticism and has commented that he has many exciting ideas for a series outside of London, claiming that there are many stories that haven't been told.
In light of its interesting reception, how do you think Small Axe fits into McQueen's wider career?
Needless to say, the career of Steve McQueen has been one of much interest to scholars and viewers alike. Critics such as Dr. Clive Nwonka have noted that the filmmakers typically cross over into the art cinema world after a career in the production of feature-length films. However, McQueen's career has performed the inverse of this. I consider the trajectory of McQueen's filmmaking experience integral to his unique and insightful personal style. For example, McQueen is not afraid to play with duration and imagery. I think this really comes to life in Mangrove, part of the Small Axe series, through the simplistic sequence of a pot rolling across the ground at the Mangrove restaurant after an unsolicited police raid. The sequence lasts for well over 30 seconds, which in the world of commercial television really pushes the boundaries of audience engagement. I felt that this sequence encouraged audiences to think about the pot as symbolic of the way that Caribbean culture manifests itself, traditional British ideals, in which the black community of Notting Hill can use to bond and celebrate their identity. By toying with duration and imagery, therefore, McQueen uses his artistic background in a way to manipulate his audience into considering the bigger picture of the subject material of his work.
As scholars, we thoroughly analyse and credit filmmakers for their fluid use of form and technique. But how would an ordinary BBC viewer consider such bold, creative choices? There has been much discussion about McQueen's place in mainstream British film and television, and scholar Ashley Clark has deemed his work highly idiosyncratic and therefore seemingly inaccessible to the British public. We could perhaps link this idea back to our previous discussion of the disappointing reception of small acts. Are the artistic techniques embedded in McQueen's style simply too highbrow to be deemed as easy watching to commercial British audiences?
On the topic of easy watching, I think we can use this as an opportunity to delve a bit deeper into the thematic content of McQueen's career. Throughout his career, McQueen has not shied away from difficult subject material. Take his 2008 film Hunger, for example. McQueen uses the film to project a sympathetic view of IRA member Bobby Sands to his audience. For the climate in which the film had been a product of, this has been quite a controversial task for a British filmmaker. Although I would argue that such a narrative perspective has been highly relevant and needed to balance out, which has traditionally been quite a subjective English view of the IRA. To use a McQueen quote from Balsam, Reynolds and Perks's book's view, artist moving image in Britain. It's about the subject, not the medium, and how the subject is asking to be represented. This implies that he has a strong understanding of the subject matter he chooses to work with, and will alter his own form to serve the subject justice in the best way possible. In the case of Hunger, this has been through a feature-length independent film with more for, and with Small Axe, this comes in the shape of a BBC iPlayer series.
Yes, I found the Small Axe series quite difficult to watch in places due to its use of violence and address of pertinent racial issues within Britain, and it certainly made me address my ignorance to both ongoing and past occurrences of racial prejudice in Britain, stimulating me to consider my own white privilege. Yet, I think this was the desired effect that McQueen anticipated by putting his work on the BBC. Considering the Black Lives Matter movement, which occurred just months prior to the screening of Small Axe on the BBC, I think that McQueen's intended message became even more pertinent. He uses the series to tackle prejudice and systematic racism within British life and institutions. In theory, the place of the series on the BBC meant that it would be highly accessible to British audiences who could utilise the medium of film as a tool to break down centuries of racial injustice and reflect on their own attitudes. It really is a shame that it received such low viewership, as the series could have been a really important device for its audience to use to instigate change. Unfortunately, I think that the association between leisure and television prohibited the success for the series. After a year of living within a pandemic, the majority of people wish to use television as a means to unwind rather than educate themselves about the harsh truths of their culture.
Great, thank you both so much for offering your insights and opinions into the Small Axe series and more generally about McQueen's background. Unfortunately, I think that is all we will have time for today. See you next time.